Hey, welcome to this episode of A Good Problem to Have. I'm your host, Tyler Olson. I wanted to talk with everyone today about post-training career path options. There's a lot of them, and it's not to say that we certainly can't talk about all of them, but I wanted to talk about two of the main ones that come to mind: academics and private practice. Those get a lot of attention because both of them are like a big net. It catches a lot of variations within those themes, right? And sometimes in academics there's I've heard the phrase privatedemics, where there's a bit more autonomy and focus that gives it a private practice feel, but it's within an academic center. And obviously private practice groups that are actually privately owned, that's its own animal. And then academics itself, where you're really pouring a lot of energy into the research side and education of younger physicians, and in other areas there's obviously there's that area too. And it's an interesting point of conversation between trainees and attending physicians when they're talking about what their options are. And from what I've gathered in speaking with attendings who I know, who work with us, or I've just had conversations with, and it's certainly not an enormous scope, but I'd say it's a fair share of conversations. They're pretty open about like the pros and cons of academics versus private practice. With one caveat, I'll say that they know academics and they're in academics, right, when they're having these conversations, because that's the role, right? That's the environment of residency and fellowship programs, is the academic environment. And so I have seen a lack of full understanding of what the real pros and cons of private practice are. And I don't think that there's anything nefarious in most cases where an attending's like being like, oh no, private practice is bad, like you don't want to do that. I do think that there can be a lack of information, because I have heard some phrases going around where trainees are afraid that private practice is just a Ponzi scheme, that you're just you have to, the reason why private practices exist and why they structure their partnership agreements and even buy-ins at times is to be able to fund older partners and make sure that they're able to buy their yachts, and even comparing it to like a Ponzi scheme. Now, of course, there are bad private practices, poorly run practices, and there are scenarios where the dynamic is some older docs, mid-career, early career physicians in the group, and the older docs have significant pull. This is not uncommon. And they also are eager to cash in on private equity opportunities. And they're worried about succession planning and whether or not it's going to work. And so they see this opportunity to retire at the expense of the younger docs, of course. And it's just, it's a, conflict of incentives, right? So, it's not to say like, oh yeah, private practice, you absolutely got to go for it. All I'm saying is that you need to understand the details. And I can't really claim credit for this particular way of thinking. Someone on a post that I made not long ago about private practice and the lack of clarity on what the risks really are, this doctor replied really great and mentioned, said, bend the private practice route, start a private practice group, bad privatedemics, and currently academic practice. There are private practices falling apart, partners ready to sell to PE, and academic practices that are as efficient as private practice. Devil's all in the details. Just need to know how to expose them. What a great thought. And that goes for either path, academics or private practice. You must understand the details of what you're signing up for. In private practice, the impact and details are a lot more financial and legal agreement oriented. Understanding the risks of starting with a group, but say you can't buy in for 2 years. Can you find out if they're talking with PE? Because that's a real risk, where you start down that path and then you don't actually have equity ownership, and then they sell it, and then you're just screwed, right? That's it. You didn't become a partner before they sold the private equity. So that's just one example, but you need to understand how to read a financial pro forma. You need to understand what a business plan is, and what sort of ways what ways in which the practice is adapting to the changing landscape. Because in almost all cases, there's larger hospital systems in the region that they have to contend with, and sometimes they have cohesive relationships. They provide support, and they have a good thing going. Other times, it's adversarial. These things are really important to understand and know. And that way you can understand what you're really signing up for, what the risks are, what the benefits are. But the same thing goes with academics. That's a lot more cultural and, big, enormous institution. I don't know the wording exactly, but when the institution is large, a lot of things can happen, and there's no specific person that can be blamed or identified to be like, oh, that's the reason why this is happening. But things can shift quickly. And this is a lot more in understanding and appreciating your role and what sort of opportunities you'll have. Like if you're someone who's interested in research, having dedicated, protected research time, if that's important to you, boy, you really got to make sure that you understand how sure those protections are, because I see those falling down all the time. And the other thing is call responsibilities, and if you're paid for them or not. And that goes for private practice and with academics. You got to get paid for these things, one way or another. Sometimes it can be embedded into the contract itself, into the salary, with an understanding of your Q4, Q5, or whatever it is, responsibilities, or it's paid out separately, and you do get paid for activity. You get paid for any sort of RVUs that are earned during that time, or it's like a per call shift. But in any case, you need to understand what you're signing up for and what you're getting. So I couldn't have said it better than this doctor. Devil's all in the details. Just need to know how to expose them. So, and then this is really for you fellows and residents who are contemplating what steps you're going to take as you transition out of training. Know what you're interested in, what you're not interested in, and that might inform private practice or academics or something in between. But no matter what that is, there isn't any one path that's like, oh, this is the yellow brick road. This is everything I've ever wanted. There's always going to be some give and take. And so it's really important for you to dive into the details in contracts, partnership agreements if you're going to private practice, culture of the institution that you're joining if it's a large academic center, and expectations of your time and income and revenue, or I should say RVU production, so that you really understand what you're signing up for. Nothing will be perfect, but it's best that we know what we're walking into before we sign that paper. See you next time.